You are listening to Whole Earth Radio.
Hi, this is Rob Seaman, and you are listening to Whole Earth Radio. Today is episode 9, What the Bleep is Going On with 2020, an astrological perspective. And as I am not an astrologer, I have invited two of my friends who are astrologers to come on today and to sort of bear with me as I ask very broad, big picture questions, because I am not coming from an astrology point of view, but I'm really curious, as I think a lot of us are, just on any insights we can get into this year. And just, I mean, I don't have to tell you how crazy it's been having a pandemic going on still. And, you know, in the midst of that, having Black Lives Matter really come to the forefront in the ways that we've all seen. And, you know, so a lot of important things are happening. And, you know, what prompted the discussion is, in some ways, is this meme. And so I'm going to put it up on the screen. This is a meme that you may have seen. It's made the rounds. And I'm just going to read it here. Food for thought. The last time Saturn was in Aquarius was during the Rodney King riots. The last time Pluto was in Capricorn was during the American Revolution. Neptune was in Pisces when Rome fell. We have all three right now. And so to start, you know, to address that as maybe a starting point, I've invited two folks who are practicing astrologers on today. Lisa Meyerson is in Chicago, practicing acupuncturist and astrologer. And I think her podcast is probably one of the best that I've heard on the subject. Her Sabian podcast on Sabian symbol astrology. And I will put links to get in touch with her, and also with, she's at lisameyerson.com, LISAMEYERSON.com. And I also have Michael Sutton on today. Michael Sutton is in Sedona, Arizona, is a spiritualist, a meditation expert, a practicing astrologer. And Michael commented that he had actually at some point predicted that we would have a revolution in June 2020 some time ago. So we will circle to that for sure. But Lisa, you were mentioning when I sent you this meme, you mentioned that the third part here, Neptune was in Pisces when Rome fell, may not be 100% accurate.
From the research that we did, it looks like it probably was in Libra. So sometimes those memes are not entirely accurate, unfortunately. but 2 out of 3 is not bad.
Well, you know,
they made a song after it.
For those of us who sort of just outside looking in realize that something's going on, you know, this is clearly, there's a convergence of events. So what would let's go to the first part. I mean, so the first statement that the last time Saturn was in Aquarius was during the Rodney King riots, and that appears to be true. How significant do you think it is that is true?
There are other transits that I have been paying more attention to, although Saturn in Aquarius is an interesting ingress. It just entered into Aquarius earlier in the year, and something like that like Aquarius would be like an inflection of new ideas, and also a limitation on resources for the people, and so people feeling frustrated by that and uncomfortable. Saturn is more comfortable in the sign that comes before Aquarius and Capricorn, and its ruling planet. And so moving into Aquarius would make people kind of burst at the seams, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the way you're describing it definitely seems like it describes this time, I mean, I think that's a very accurate description, you know, and just the obvious. And maybe folks will be watching this at some point in the future and not remember that we here in Illinois, anyway, we've been on lockdown for 3 months, you know, and we're in phase 3 of reopening. So just to relate it to sort of practical everyday, you know, somebody sent me a picture of the bike rack at Walmart and at Target, which are completely empty. And so the comment was, well, first it was toilet paper and now it's bicycles, you know? And so obviously COVID-19, one would assume, has affected supply, you know, to the point where it's hard to get a bicycle right now, that's a first in my lifetime. I've never seen scarcity of anything like that for any length of time that I can remember. So it's interesting that you correlate that with that kind of trend, because I think that's something most of us are experiencing to some degree.
The planets set the stage, or they set the, imagine yourself in your life and you're in a theater. The outer planets are basically the scenery. Saturn in Aquarius is like, let's think outside of the box. And a Saturn is the planet that says, well, we only have a box. There's nothing outside of it. We have these rules. We have this definition. What do you mean we don't want 45-degree angle corners? We want rounded corners. Aquarius is saying, hey, the way we've been looking at things needs to have another look. And in Saturn, it's all of those rules. So you take Saturn and Aquarius. So we're going through a whole time frame this year of going, how do we rewrite the rules, the laws, the way we see things? And ultimately, it's outer planets, so it's perceptions. With all of them in retrograde, that's the perception that it's going backwards, when in reality it is not. But it's being able to step outside of your perceptions. And not that many, as we're finding on social media, not that many people can step outside of their perceptions or their perspectives. And we have a division. One thing that I really enjoyed from Lisa's podcast that I heard, she spoke about the great eclipse cutting across the United States and creating a division. We definitely have a massive division. And that's what Saturn and Aquarius and all these retrograde planets are requesting right now. Hey, how are you looking at this? Can you look at it differently? And why are you so attached to what you're looking at? That's how I see it from, or one of the ways.
I think that's really good.
Thank you.
The other thing I'm thinking about too is, and we haven't talked about this yet, but the nodes shifted into different degrees and different elements. And the north and south node, this wasn't mentioned on the meme, but the north node will be the path to move towards, and the south node will be the path it's sort of like our path of least resistance, and that thing that we keep doing out of force of habit. And for a year and a half, the north node was in Cancer, and the south node was in Capricorn. And we were talking about Saturn moving from Capricorn into Aquarius, the box. And so North Node was in Capricorn, and that was another thing to put us back in a box. So we're thinking of, like, even kids in cages. I feel like the North and South Node, it's so North and South Node, Cancer and Capricorn, because Cancer is also about family, Cancer's mother, Capricorn's father. And then it's this, like thinking about security constantly over the last year and a half. And then when we moved into Gemini and Sagittarius, just recently, within like the last month or so, we had this another, once again, all of these protests, all of these new ideas, like we have to change all this. We've been in this cocoon for now, and we have to break out of it. And it feels like there's a lot of anger, but what it reminds me of is like a butterfly really feeling uncomfortable at this point, like just feeling so confined, and I have to get out of here. And so that's the combination of Saturn and Aquarius, even though it's soon going to move back into Capricorn again for a while because it's going retrograde. but we'll still be moving through the North and South Node in Gemini and Sagittarius. So in air and fire, whereas before it was in earth and water, or water and earth. But when I was seeing that, like all the protests, like none of it surprised me because there was that shift. And it's often a big shift. It feels almost overnight, like what is happening here. And there were some very, very tragic events that were the catalyst for it. But this is where we're going to be for the next year and a half, is moving through these Gemini and Sagittarius degrees through the nodes. And the nodes will really define our life path for a while, like the direction that we're all going in for a while.
Before we, move any further into the meme here, but so you are referring to nodes, and I just wanted to read, this is just a general definition, a point at which lines or pathways intersect or branch. So is what we're calling a node an intersection of planetary orbits? Is that fair to say?
Yes, yes. And then the eclipses also, the eclipses will be, for the next eclipse cycle, will be Gemini, Sagittarius eclipses. And so where you have Gemini and Sagittarius in your chart, it'll often be impacted by the eclipses coming up. So for me personally, when the North and South Node were in Cancer and Capricorn, it was affecting my 6th and 12th house. And now it'll be affecting my 11th and 5th house. So it was a very introspective time for me the last year and a half, but other people may have been experiencing it differently based on where it is in their own natal chart. But in the world, it would be where we were really focusing on making sure that we were all secure. And then with the Cancer Capricorn nodes, and now moving into Gemini and Sagittarius, it's much more being concerned about ideas and the state of the world. And we're leaving our houses now. We're throwing caution to the wind, and we really want change right now. And so I think over the next year and a half, we're going to see things change. And if they don't change, there's going to be more and more protests.
So if I could relate that, I would assume that people, after 3 months of lockdown, that people might feel a little cabin fever, or just, that's an understatement. But you're saying that there's really a planetary influence on that as well that could maybe, I mean, that seems sort of like a double whammy, because we have real, tangible, day-to-day events that are making us feel this way, coupled with an astrological influence. I mean, maybe the two for some folks are not any different. I mean, some people may see them just as, but I'm just thinking for the average person that is having an aha moment with what you're saying, like, and kind of to go back to what, I think Michael was saying, the idea that we could, this is, a good way to look at this maybe as an opportunity for all of us to see things differently. And if people are feeling frustrated by events in their life,
And something I'd like to add that, in the astrology I do, which is Western astrology, not Vedic, so I'm not following astronomy, I'm following archetypes, I'm following mythology. But the nodes have to do with the path of the moon and the sun. Like the North Node is the dragon's head, South Node, dragon's tail. And in essence, as an astrologer, we look at those for karma, past lives, or we look for an ongoing story to weave into a person's chart. My personal, I do intuitive astrology. I actually have no training whatsoever in astrology, just a love of mythology. But I've logged, well over 20,000 sessions with people. So I've accumulated data of understanding and reading charts. Back in the 80s, my sister would do the math and create a chart. I did the interpretation. Now we have computers. Everybody can get their chart, all that access if they have information. But it's a translation that's the challenge, and where we'll get lost in the podcast is if we overanalyze too many of the little or all the factors, because it's an infinite amount of ways to look at astrology. I think sticking to the meme might help us just for the fact that changes are afoot. And one thing you mentioned at the beginning is that I had made a prediction. A friend got her new ephemeris in December, hanging out with a lady named Kiara, who's an expert in human design. And she's teaching me human design while I'm teaching her Western astrology. Anyway, we just scanned in the ephemeris and we said, holy cow, look at what's going on in June. And I'm like, what do you think, Kiara? And we both basically came up with, wow, that looks like a time of revolution, big change. Whether or not we get there to revolution, which I personally think is much needed, I doubt that will happen. But I think we will start to see the overhauling of systems and the way we're doing things. We're even changing the way we're doing business through COVID. You know, it may not be exactly a revolution, but it is a revolution. 10 years ago, people would have said, oh, let's throw a revolution so we could work more at home. Well, now we are getting to work more at home. And, you know, that's very different. We have planets in Cancer right now that are basically saying, ooh, home. Let's do more from home. Let's keep our self safe, things like that. So I hope that helps, Rob.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think you're right that, you know, all of this is so big picture that it is, I think the key with astrology really is an interpretation, because, you know, I'm not going to become an expert like the two of you are by Googling stuff, you know. And it's a funny thing about our culture that we've kind of become a society that believes that you can, you know, everyone, well, you know, I can look that up and you know, that has its shortcomings and its faults. But it's funny, I just want to jump to the second part of the meme here. The last time Pluto was in Capricorn was during the American Revolution. And I had someone say back to me, well, that just seems wrong. And they didn't have any real basis for saying that. They just seemed wrong to them. And so I just looked it up, and Pluto, I Googled it, and Pluto, our favorite dwarf planet since 2006, apparently, the orbital period appears to be 248 years. And I just throwing out there as I'm looking at this, Neptune has an orbit of 165 years, Mercury 88 days, and Uranus 84 years. That's just peripheral information. But when you do the math on Pluto's orbit, that one seems, just from my outside looking in, you know, rough period of time, that it would be true. That Pluto was indeed in Capricorn during the American Revolution. So there's a revolution that happened.
One thing that's more important than that is Saturn and Pluto conjunct in Capricorn. So you have two planets, and let me clear up something with Pluto. Everyone wants to say it's a dwarf or a tiny one. Think of mythology. Pluto is Hades. Yeah, they kind of viewed him as a little bit tiny, not important. Let's push him down to the underworld. But think of all of that. He is the true king of the underworld. So think of subconscious. Think of the things you suppress as opposed to the things that you naturally express. But we've had Saturn and Pluto in conjunction, and the last time that happened was in 1518, and that's when King Charles opened the transatlantic slave trade on a massive scale. So we now have those planets in retrograde, and they're saying, hey, remember this crap? Well, hey, that's kind of worth writing about. And you can see where there's an underlying tension that would be there for anyone that opposes slavery.
Are you talking about Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn?
Yes.
Lisa, would this be a good point to maybe ask you, because I know that you work with more than one school of astrology, how different would the interpretation of these things, you know, Pluto and Capricorn, or what was the other planet you mentioned, Michael? I'm sorry.
Saturn.
So Saturn and Pluto being in Capricorn. How different is that in Sabian symbol astrology versus what would we just say, mundane or Western astrology?
Yeah. So I do a combination of Western, mundane, and Sabian symbols. I just started to incorporate the Sabian symbols a few years ago. When I was working with a group of astrologers, we had kind of like an astrological support group, kind of like group therapy for astrologers. It was really fantastic. And
cool.
One of my friends is a relative distantly of Elsie Wheeler, who channeled the Sabian symbols. And I started to learn about them through her and through the group, and just started to experiment with them. And there is an astrologer in Australia named Linda Hill, who I found that I was really drawn to on social media, and I friended her on Facebook. We started to talk more, and I started to mentor with her with the Sabian symbols, and she wrote the book that I often refer to. There are other astrologers, like Mark Edmund Jones is the astrologer that Elsie Wheeler worked with when she channeled the symbols, and Dane Rudyard is also known for the Sabian symbols. He's another well-known late astrologer author. But yeah, so I agree with Michael about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. A lot of us would look at 2020 and think, God, what is going to happen? And there was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in February, and historically, we've had it a few times in the 20th century in other signs. And like in World War I, we had Saturn-Pluto conjunction. I believe that we had it in World War II as well. We had Saturn opposing Pluto for September 11th. And we're having it now, and that can often feel like a very apocalyptic time. And there often is, when it's combined with Jupiter, a pandemic or an epidemic of some sort. And the Spanish flu, Saturn-Pluto happened, I believe, before. I have to look at my memories. I usually refer to it on my computer, and I'm on my computer with you guys now. But I believe that Saturn-Pluto happened before with the war, but then Jupiter conjuncted Pluto, and then the Spanish flu or the 1918 pandemic happened. And now we're having Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all conjunct. And of course, once again, we're having another pandemic. When we had Saturn-Pluto in, I believe, 1982, 83, or 1983, 84, we had the AIDS epidemic. And so it's not surprising at all that we're having something like this. In terms of the protests, that also, I mean, we're having a lot of breaking down of the structures that we thought we were going to have forever. So, you know, like I'm hoping that I have Social Security when I retire, but like I wouldn't be surprised if some of these systems that we hold dear disappear. We also had Saturn-Pluto in 1948 at the end of World War II, and some of the countries that have Saturn-Pluto in their chart, I think of Israel and India, and they've had a lot of issues. Like Israel and Palestine, Israelis and Palestinians are constantly fighting, and also in India, Kashmir is the most militarized area in the world, and so they have it natally in their own natal charts. And so that's what I find really fascinating, is to look at countries and see what they have. You know, just like a person, like you look at their birth chart, like when they signed their first constitution, and you know, and just to see what's going on. And so Saturn-Pluto is not for the faint of heart. It's a year that a lot of us would look at and think, wow, like let's just take this a day at a time. Let's buy enough supplies, make sure you have enough toilet paper, make sure you bought a bike.
Yeah. Well, I just looked up something here, and this is interesting. This is from Business World India, so it must be true. And they went through the 10 major pandemics and what was going on in terms of astrological position during those.
Wow.
Man, this internet's amazing, huh? I hope this one is right. But it's interesting because this is from an Indian.
And so that would be Vedic astrology, which is different than our Western. So the planets change, but basically the stories are all the same.
Yeah, the aspects will probably be the same, but yeah, the planets, the signs will be different. They'll be like one-off.
Well, I'm just not going to go through this whole list. I can put a link to this. I think it's interesting. But the flu pandemic of 1918, which you mentioned, death toll 20 to 50 million. God, there's a figure for you. Jeez. Planetary position.
More than all of the 20th century wars combined.
Good gravy. Planetary position during the flu pandemic of 1918, Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in Gemini, Rahu-Ketu in the Taurus-Scorpio axis, and Saturn is trine to Rahu.
And the, Rahu-Ketu are the nodes in Vedic astrology language.
Would that be, would Rahu be a north or a south node, or is that just kind of its own thing?
One is north and one is south, and I don't remember which is which.
I can't help you either. I'm friends that love Vedic. My grandmother taught me Western as a kid. I'm sticking with it.
Well, it's interesting.
Oh, you're lucky.
It is very interesting because they do this for they do it also for the HIV/AIDS pandemic. So I'll put this link in there just for anyone that wants to look at that from a Vedic.
Yeah, I think the point they're trying to make is basically, does astrology or do big astrological or astronomical events happen and coincide with what happens with our planet? I mean, ask any astrologer, we're all going to say yes. But, I mean, prevailing science says it's absolutely not related, or, they have tons of reasons why not to listen to it. But predictions have been made. They're definitely interpretations, but you can really see big changes coming up. In some years, there just aren't that interesting of planetary configurations. And with all of the planets, not all, but most planets in retrograde right now, the big ones, to put in context for you, Rob, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, if you think about it, that's Zeus, Saturn, Father Time, Chronos, and then you have Pluto, which is Hades. So Pluto and Hades are brothers. They don't like each other. Zeus already sent, Hades to hell to rule down there. He's upset about it. And so they're out in the open having like a family quarrel. And so we're experiencing a big family quarrel in our country right now on so many fronts. And yes, you could say, wow, that's super vague. But the reality is, what does anyone really know right now? I mean, what is truth? Because you can find a fact for either side you want to look at. And it really just depends on how you want to perceive it. Can you call this a pandemic? It's definitely not a pandemic when you compare it to the Spanish flu. But it's definitely affecting people in a huge way, just not the same death toll.
Yeah, and we're still on the first wave. I mean, the 1918 flu, their first wave was not nearly what it was in the second and third waves.
That's good to note. It's funny you related to where we are astrologically, Lisa, to feeling safe. I think both of you kind of are painting that picture where, people wanting to be at home, right? You said, Michael, I mean,
yeah.
And it's interesting because that's what we're experiencing. Some of us would rather be not working from home, and increasingly more and more of us are going back out to work. But if it's in the context of what you're saying, and also the health and medical experts are saying that there may very well be a second and third wave, we hope not. I mean, but hoping.
Yeah.
Is, um,
The challenge for me, I came from the health food industry and spent 20 years in there. So I have almost like zero faith in the medical industry or what they state, because I don't believe it's a viable system. I believe our health industry is far too profit geared and less into well-being geared. So it's really challenging to listen and have someone tell me what I should be afraid of as theoretical science as opposed to experiential or factual science. And, that's how I see it also. And I think that's a division that's happening based on all of these planets. Am I completely delusional in believing in the retrograde? Or am I open-minded enough to see that, hey, it's really not going backwards. My thinking is just backwards.
Yeah, I think, if I could relate it to sort of how all of us experience events differently, right? We're all individuals.
Definitely.
So something like the quarantine and the lockdown and the COVID-19, we're all going to experience it differently. I personally have not felt afraid at any point. I'm not, knock on wood, I'm not trying to, tempt fate or anything like that, but I feel like it's not a lot to ask people to wear masks at this point. And in Illinois, it's the law. So it's what I've been doing. And I don't have to, I've kind of enjoyed that I don't have to decide, do I wear a mask in here or not? It's the law. So I just have to do it, or the manager would ask me to leave. And so it's forced social responsibility. And I'm just sort of in favor of that. I think about like seatbelts, I met somebody who is not of either, I've met more than one person like this who's not of either political party, but in this case, she voted strictly based on helmet laws. And so whichever politician was opposed to helmet laws for motorcycles, she would vote for that candidate. And to talk about a single issue voter, someone that dedicated to not wearing protective gear, that they vote based on that more than taxes or anything else. And it just, we didn't have seatbelts before Ralph Nader, did unsafe at any speed, right? Like, we're Americans, we drink out of the water hose. Like, you have to force us to do the right thing. And that being said, some people would say, well, maybe that isn't the right thing, or they want the freedom to even not to do what would arguably be the safer thing. So it's an interesting time in respect to that. And I, am not in the business of telling people what to do. I just share my own experience, which is that I think it's hard to argue that we haven't made a dent in COVID with the social distancing. I mean, there's no way we couldn't have. So when we say, oh, or I don't say, but people say, oh, the death toll is only this, it's only 100,000. Look at the extreme measures we've taken, and that's where it is. Can you imagine, with the contagiosity of this disease, where we would be if we had not done that? Doesn't that seem like maybe we would? I mean, I hate to be like, preacher of doom here, but I mean, would we be at 1 million if we'd not done social distancing? Do we know?
I really have no idea, and I think the reality is no one does. Possibly herd immunity would have taken over. Again, you're dealing with theory, and you may be 100% accurate, or you may be 1% accurate. None of us know. And I do want to give you the caveat. I live in a really tiny little town of Sedona. I am in like a crystalline bubble. And everybody here relies on tourism, but nobody likes the tourism, because the tourism, they dump their trash in the creek, they clog up our tiny little roads, but the businesses only thrive with tourism. So we had our stores looted, not technically looted, but purchased out by tons of tourists that came here and just bought up so much stuff. So we have this tiny little town of less than 15,000 that are going, holy cow, what do we do with all these tourists? So for the first few weeks of quarantine, I think everybody was kind of celebrating because it got quiet and we started to get our supplies back.
So you're saying the kind of the stores had been cleaned out by tourists prior to
right as it started. Yes, there was so much panic with a lot of people. I saw so many California Sprinter vans doing like 2 to 3 carts leaving Whole Foods. And, you know, we're a tiny community. That was all very important supplies for us. But
yeah,
we're a huge non-mask area. We've had very limited. Arizona's just gotten more of an outbreak, and we're made some press. Sedona, I'm a mask wearer in a place that I think is necessity, but like at a bar, I'm not going to wear a mask. That's just ludicrous. It's me throwing the dice as if I'm going gambling. And they basically make you wear a mask in a winery, but if you're drinking, you don't have to wear a mask. If you walk to a different table, you have to wear a mask, but if you're drinking your wine while you walk to the other table, you don't have to wear a mask. And it's like, come on.
And that's because wine is virucidal, right? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll break through that
ludicrous
envelope around the virus.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think as we relate this back to the meme here, you know, I just wanted to touch on this last piece that Lisa, that you corrected. So I'm just going to read it again. Neptune was in Pisces when Rome fell. And you said Neptune is actually in a different...
was in Libra, I believe. Yeah, and it is in Pisces now. And it's in the same degree of Pisces from like April 23rd through August 27th. It's just sitting on this 1 degree of Pisces. It went retrograde on the 23rd of June. And so it's just moving really, really slowly and then moving back. And then it'll move back to this degree later on next year. But it's in one position for like a third of the year in Pisces. The reason why I'm bringing that up because the Sabian symbol of that degree is a little lamb, a child, and a Chinese servant. Like some of these symbols sound really strange. But the meaning of that one is about oppression or codependence. And so it's just sitting there and people are thinking about like their own racism. They're inventorying their own racism. We're talking out in the open about oppression, racism, like our role in it, how we've been impacted by other people oppressing us or being racist against us, and vice versa. So there's a lot of subconscious or unconscious, we're plumbing that old story that's part of the American story. And I mean, it's going on worldwide too. I mean, other countries are marching on our behalf.
Wow. I've got to relate this to social media because, you know, in 2020, everything relates to social media. And
Right.
I just saw, I mean, man, I hate to be that guy, but I just got to tell you guys because it relates just directly to what you're saying. I feel about people examining their own values, deeply held prejudices, I think, and this being a time that to me is unlike any other time I can remember. But this was about a Karen. This was KKK Karen. KKK Karen.
Nice.
And KKK Karen was seen at a protest, I'm just going to say in the South. I am from the South, so I can say that. I'm not.
Same.
I'm not into Southern shaming, man, but you know, I do
I'm from
think
Detroit.
I do support what Well, let me just say that this video is something that I don't think anyone would support. KKK Karen, obviously Ku Klux Klan, she went viral protesting counter-protesting a Black Lives Matter protest, waving a Confederate flag drunkenly, dancing around with it. KKK Karen was pretty toasted, and she was saying to the Black Lives Matter protesters, KKK, I'm going to tell my grandchildren to hate you. And the video of her in the back of this pickup truck doing this stuff, harassing black people at a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest, went viral. And she was embarrassed. I mean, which is sort of like, there are plenty of people that would do that crap and not have any shame about it. They'd be like, hell yeah, I did that. KKK Karen, I just got to keep saying her name. She saw herself across the internet, and she was ashamed. She was confronted with her own behavior, and the story that she's selling is that she was blackout drunk. That's probably true if you watch the video, and that she didn't believe any of that stuff. She doesn't support the KKK. She says she did not know what the Confederate flag stood for.
That's funny. So astrologically,
Really?
you could say that shame is Saturn, and getting that all out is Pluto. Pluto's all that shit we don't want to share. And Saturn is like that shame, the judgment, the laws, the rules. And just once again, it's just the stage is set. So the planets have created the setting, and KK Karen said, oh my God, if this is the setting, I'm supposed to act like this. Well, you're not supposed to act like anything. You're supposed to be yourself and enjoy the scenery. But I think that's absolutely horrible. I have not seen KKK Karen. My thing that I like to post on social media when people do the All Lives Matter is, if all lives matter, why are Mexican kids in cages in America? And basically, it's a really fast way to spot a racist, or at least the person that doesn't realize you're a racist. But most of them do.
Yeah, it's pretty tone deaf at this point.
And I think it relates to how people experience things and the idea of the echo chamber. And trust me, I'm not here to make excuses for racists any day of the week, but I do want to understand how people stay in a box with that shit and how we can help them get out of it if possible, because it doesn't seem like just repeating what appears obvious to, perhaps the three of us and a great number of people really does it. But, you see these things where, Camus Bell on CNN had this show about race in America where he went to like a KKK cross burning, and he's a black man, going to a KKK rally and a very small one, because there are really not that many of these people. I mean, at this point, their numbers, I believe, are dwindling, but it is just, my question is, how can we give people an opportunity to change? And what a great story it makes every time you see someone who has been in the midst of that and rejected it, so I'll give Karen the benefit of the doubt there. Maybe social media is not very forgiving, and I don't think that they should be forgiving of racism, but it does make me ask the question, how do we allow people to change? Because if we're demanding change, we better figure out what it looks like and how we react when it comes back to us and the person says, I was wrong. Racism is wrong if we don't say, okay, good, you changed. Or, if we don't get it, you know what I'm saying? It's like if we're not allowing people to change, we push them in further into their corner.
Right. I think that is a challenge. And basically, these planets are kind of trying to help dig us out of the holes we've created for ourselves in our lives. And they're throwing us a lifeline. but that lifeline is so important to, you can take that lifeline of almost fear or a lifeline of hope, and how you paint your picture based on what you think you're seeing is like, I'm sure to KKK Karen, she sees all these black people and she's really seeing this could get incredibly violent while not realizing she was the only violent person there. I think she probably will go through a catharsis or a change and find humiliation and realize, wow, I was the asshole, but thank God I got that shit out of me. And possibly someone will be kind to her in the near future, and it'll crystallize or catalyze a deeper change. But the planets are saying, hey, we can assist you in this. And this is where a person like Lisa and I, then we take your personal chart, we look at it, how it's relating to what's currently going on, and we help you move through your transformations, your transmutation, or those big changes in life. And that's where we excel. It's not so much, I'm definitely not much of a world predictor. I prefer working with individuals, but I have done astrology for quite a few companies. I even did it in the natural food industry, Rob, with
Cool.
a couple of stores. So, I mean, it can be applied to anything. And yes, it is incredibly vague, but what isn't vague these days? It's all theory anyway.
Yeah, it's true. It's so much fun. I work 4 days a week as an acupuncturist, and then I've set aside 2 days to do readings, and it's been
Nice.
wonderful. A lot of my patients have hired me to do readings for them, but I've been doing more and more professionally, especially with the pandemic. It's something that I've found that I actually really enjoy being at home. I have been back in the clinic. I've been really busy in the clinic, but right now astrology is actually probably my most favorite thing to do.
Well, if we could touch on that maybe just a little bit about, your work at the clinic. I mean, obviously during the pandemic, you are, I mean, have you seen any patients who were positive for COVID-19, or is that not, I mean, that's probably not safe.
Yeah, no, I take their temperature when they first come in. Everyone has to wear a mask. Everyone has to wash their hands when they first come in. No one, if people are positive with COVID, they'd have to cancel their appointment. We ask them a bunch of questions beforehand, like have they traveled somewhere where there's COVID? Have you been to a gathering where somebody got sick, and so on. Mostly what I've seen is people know people who know people. Like I have a patient who, but like one of her students, her family lost 7 family members. I mean, so it's not that far removed. It's people they know. I have some colleagues who've gotten sick with coronavirus in other states, but I feel in Illinois we've done a really, really good job. But I still do hear about cases, but I haven't seen anybody directly who has been sick. One of my colleagues at the center I work in did get coronavirus early on, but she didn't get severely ill with it.
That's great.
So I feel like we've been lucky.
Yes, very lucky in that respect. I just, being in the medical profession, I mean, you're so high contact, even with the precautions. I'm glad that you're well, and that it sounds like your colleagues have been safe. And just, again, like you said, I'm glad, I said something about this early on, and my thought was, as people were debating lockdowns and quarantines, and I know there's more to it than this, but it's really hard to argue with erring on the side of caution. If you say, oh no, you're being too careful, I mean, it's a really hard thing to argue against, but it comes down to different perspectives and how people experience this differently depending on what they're focusing, and depending, going back to pushing people in their corner, the echo chamber of social media. I am of one sort of position on this. So I post things about this, and I don't know if it's the algorithm or just because I certainly have friends that are very different than me politically, and I've had some COVID-19 arguments and things, and then at some point I just backed off because this is really going nowhere. I'm not changing anyone's mind, and at some point, if we're just venting to each other, an argument that never advances, that is just binary, side A, side B, I'm pro-mask, I'm anti-mask, and you go back and forth. And at some point, what's going to happen? You're going to start insulting each other if you're not careful, and then it's like anything. It's a pissing contest. You could be arguing about Coke versus Pepsi or something toxic like that. I mean, it's just human beings in the age of social media are, it seems like, really attenuated to binary issues.
Yeah, and I also want to say that, I'm an acupuncturist, so I'm not a nurse in a COVID-19 clinic. And I have just last week, I worked with somebody who is a nurse in the clinic like that, and she sees a lot more than I do. Like, I'm not going to work with those patients, but, it's really different. But now I used to ask people to come in when they were sick because I could get rid of or lessen the duration of their symptoms. So oftentimes people would come in like feeling like they had a sore throat and a stiff neck, and they would leave with that gone. But now if they have those symptoms, I ask them not to come in at all. So we're not taking any chances. If any of us in the center, I think there are about 18 of us who work in the center, if there's any case, we're going to shut the clinic down again. So we're being extremely careful.
And that's good. That's definitely good. Like I said, you can't be too careful, especially when you're in touch with the public a lot. So, Michael, you said there's been very little incidents of coronavirus, COVID-19 in Sedona. I mean, they're more the cases that have been in Arizona, because we've seen about a spike, a surge happening in Arizona, but that would be more like Phoenix and
I don't follow the news at all, but California, Phoenix, would be where we would get most of our corona if we did get corona. They all come. Sedona gets 5 million tourists plus a year, and we're an incredibly tiny little town overrun by hotels and tourist shops. Super fun, best community ever. Last night I'm at the Posse Grounds Park, and probably have 100 people, all relatively social distance in their groups. I think maybe 5 people out of that group wearing masks. Not that we felt we were unsafe, because we're all in open air. Nothing closed about it. It's like being outside in a yard. But we've had, I have a friend that's a nurse. We were hanging out last night, and she said, she's like, please don't quote me because I really don't know. This is strictly hearsay. And she says in the whole surrounding area, 35 cases in the, hospitals or I guess wherever they would go.
Wow, that's great. Because Cook County is the number 2 county with the most cases in the country.
Cook County? I think
Chicago.
Okay,
Chicago.
yeah, okay.
And it's a pretty good county.
Rob and I are.
So the fear level is far greater there. That would be a fun thing to look up astrocartography for currently what's going on astrologically through that band. I'm a huge fan of that form of astrology, but I don't think it's that great for predictive stuff. So
you could sort of do, in theory, just do Chicago.
Absolutely. Yeah, just look at Chicago, pull up that chart, and then we take a look of what Saturn, Pluto, the nodes. You're looking at things that are connecting with what the planets are doing now, and how that shadows or shows up or lightens the spot in, say, a natal chart or birth chart. So I'm sure there's on Google, we could Google Chicago's birth chart or natal chart, and then we just look at key things and we progress it to today.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, I think, the key thing seems to be, if I were to have a takeaway from talking to the two of you, is interpretation, and I mean, that's what both of you do. When you do a reading with somebody, you are taking, oh, wow.
Well, let's see it, Lisa.
So Lisa's
That's
holding
perfect.
up. Hold that up again. Hey, Lisa, would you hold that up again? Horoscopes of the U.S. states and cities.
So let's take a look at Chicago, see what it comes up with Pluto and Saturn in those charts.
That's really interesting. I think that, cities have personalities anyway, and the same way that either of you would relate that to an individual personality, looking at that for a city, that's not something I've seen a lot of. You could maybe take that book and run with it.
We could even say Chicago's the windy city, so it's ruled by air, and this is allegedly an airborne virus or attacking the breath, respiratory system.
Yeah, unless
it's a Libra rising.
Chicago
Libra's an air sign, and I'm looking for. Oh, the sun is in Leo, 19 degrees. Moon is in Cancer. Transiting Pluto and Saturn are in the 4th house of Chicago.
Okay.
That's the house of blues, right?
It's the house of
because
blues.
it's the house of home.
Yeah, Capricorn is on that house, and it would make sense why we're so into wearing our masks and staying home.
Yeah.
I mean, Illinois as a state has been doing really great. I mean, we've been really into following the rules.
It's interesting that you say really great in following the rules, yet you're number one. Okay, Arizona is not following the rules.
Oh, yes, that's true. I'm being a hypocrite.
Well, and if you look at the curve,
cases. Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the curve for Chicago, I mean, or for Illinois, it looks like a bell curve, so as far as COVID goes, I mean, if we've been good about following the rules, it would appear to have had the desired effect. I mean, I can put up the chart.
Nice.
But we're talking today, today is the 27th. I could put up a chart through but it's a bell curve, it's like,
okay, that's cool.
And then it's gone down. And, I mean, I'm not here to tell you that that's going to continue or that, we were wrong if we have another spike. I mean, I don't want to, get on a soapbox here, but I think
the weather and your dense population plays more of a role. I think Arizona was benefited at first because we had warmer weather, more vitamin D3 production from the sun. And it's a very outdoor state until you hit July, August. And then you're dealing with a lot of air conditioners where if you're going to get virus, bacteria, or that type of crap, it's going to come from those systems as opposed to outdoors. One of the hardest things I faced in my life is I used to teach you create your own reality. And it's kind of like this: is Corona reality or COVID a reality you're creating? The first time I really came across a really intense a victim of rape, I realized, wow, I could never tell this person they created their own reality. It was so harsh, and it really got me to change my approach on counseling and how to do sessions with people. And it's the same thing. Like, I get Corona serious. I get that this is a threat, could be a massive pandemic. For me, I can still realize for my own thinking it's theoretical, but it's way more to a lot of people. And I'm definitely not suggesting it's not something to be cautious about.
Well, and I know, that this isn't the topic of the day, but I know that we're all also aware of natural antivirals and immune supporting protocols and things that we've probably been doing this year. I mean, as much as we might in some ways create our, I mean, we definitely in a lot of ways create, our mind shapes our experience of the reality that is there, and what is objective reality. I mean, that's a big philosophical question.
Yes.
I like Robert Anton Wilson used to talk about reality tunnels, and we might, and I think that's especially relevant in the social media era, where I don't know that some people might be able to shape their own reality, but most of them are having it shaped for them, and they don't actually they're not conscious of that. So they have the potential to shape their reality, but they're not utilizing it. They're being very passive and accepting, being consumers of other people's opinions. And you see these flagrant examples where people are just repeating things that they clearly haven't fully digested. And I understand that that is a thing humans do, but
correct.
I mean, we all jump on bandwagons and we accept, but maybe if I were to tie this all together here in summary, kind of wrapping up, but astrologically, this seems like a good time, and maybe there is no bad time, to re-examine our own points of view and opinions and previously held viewpoints, but maybe this is, like you said, both of you, the planets are kind of influencing us to be in a position to do that. And maybe all we have to do is just get out of our own way.
Correct. Yeah. And what I was taught is those outer planets are kind of like the collective consciousness. The inner planets are how we deal with ourselves in a personal nature. That's why you'll meet people that go, oh, Mercury retrograde doesn't affect me. Well, that's an inner planet or a personal planet. And some people really don't get affected by it that much. When the outer planets go retrograde, it's not that big of a deal because it's more of collective consciousness. So it takes a large group of people, but where is that seesaw going to teeter? Will we really teeter towards revolution, or will we teeter towards, oh, I like to buy the stuff that I like to buy. I like my life the way it is, and my life matters. I think the reality is people are starting to realize that not all lives do matter. It's a weighted system, and that shifting of the weights is definitely happening, and the planets are allowing the light to be brought to the, in essence, like the darkness.
And I've actually seen that the outer planets, if they are transiting your personal planets, as a square or an opposition, it can have a lot of impact on your life in a way that can shake things up. So a few years ago, I had, good. Like a few years ago, I had transiting Neptune squaring my natal moon, and I moved like 5 times in that 2-year period. Like I would rent from somebody, they would present themselves this way, and then they would, it was like very Neptunian. They would present themselves this way, but then it would be very different when I would move in. Like, you can put furniture in this living room. I'd move in, like, no, I'm using that room for a massage studio. Like, oh, okay, I guess I'm living in a massage studio. And then as soon as it was done, like, I moved into the place I'm in now, and I've been here for almost 3 years. But also the pandemic, if the Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter are in a positive aspect to your own chart, this might be a pleasant experience for you. And if it's in a square or opposition, it might be a really difficult experience for you. So I've actually personally experienced more trines and sextiles, so it's been easier for me personally. But there was a period of time where I had these Pluto squares that just never let up from like 2008 through, or 2004 through 8. And so it's interesting to talk to people around my age and ask them, how were those years for you? And we're able to commiserate.
Nice.
So I felt like personally I've been fortunate, but also I have a lot of compassion for people who are going through what so many people are going through right now.
I think that's great.
Yeah, no, I think both of you have some really good insights here, and I just really appreciate you guys joining me today to have this conversation because regardless of where people are with astrology, some people don't, like myself, just don't know very much. But like you said, relating it to history, relating it to things we're experiencing, I think it gives people sort of, to go back to that meme, food for thought, where people can, and it's a good time to maybe coincidentally, astrologically, to explore new ways of looking at things. And that, to me, it can just never be bad. Having more sort of an open-minded society is a goal that I've thought would be a good goal since I was, a little kid. I think we all just kind of get that. Sometimes the world seems kind of narrow, and if we can open it up, regardless of where people are, that would just seem like a good thing,
one thing I wanted to recommend too. I'm in a group with some other astrologers where we're reading Cosmos and Psyche by William Tarnas. And he started writing this book as a non-astrologer and looking at all the different historical patterns, like very similar to what you pulled up in that article. But it's a big, thick book that honestly I have to read it out loud because there's so much detail. Otherwise, I'm going to lose some of the detail. And he'll go into the Saturn-Pluto conjunctions through history and other types of transits like Uranus-Pluto, which was the revolutionary time of the 60s. And he'll talk about different, like the French Revolution was another one of those very revolutionary times. And it's a really fantastic book. And so I'd recommend if you put that in the notes as a reading recommendation for non-astrologers.
Definitely. I definitely will. And also, if you look at the description of today's podcast, I will put links to both of your contact information. If you want to get in touch with Michael or Lisa, they're both actively doing charts for folks and consultations, and as you've heard, other interesting things. And I'm going to put links to the reading material that you recommended, and I might even put a link to Karen in there. So,
oh my God, I think you should.
And it's none of my business, but well, maybe it is. Maybe everything's everyone's business now. But my point would not be to shame her, and maybe that'll be my point. Would be I don't buy the excuse, hey, I was just drunk. I don't think that works for racist outburst. But if someone were to, if KKK Karen were to progress to where she says, you know what, I realize that came from somewhere, that came from inside of me, and I reject that, which is what I think she's trying. It's hard for people when they're under fire to come to that place, but I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I just want to embrace the person that rejects hate, regardless of where they were a week ago. I just think that, maybe you could say she was forced into it, but I think there's some bravery in that, in rejecting hate, especially when it's very ingrained in certain places,
Yeah, I mean, if somebody can feel shame around that, I think that's actually pretty healthy. I know people that reject shame entirely. And actually, I'm a Capricorn.
Oh, so am I.
Well, I guess we should have started out that way. I should have asked both of you what your signs were. I'm showing my novice. But
I'm a Capricorn with a Gemini moon and a Leo rising.
Oh my God, we are so similar. I'm a Capricorn sun, Gemini moon, Taurus rising.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. We're going to be friends.
Definitely. I've worked with a lot of acupuncturists. I'm really, they're fun for me to work with because when I let my mind go, I see the pathways like ley lines. And it's a big joy. I love being able to help people get healthy. Acupuncture is awesome.
Well, fantastic. Thanks to both of you for being on today. And, let's do it again sometime. I definitely think, there's so many directions you could go with this. I think, it's interesting to people to get some insights, into their lives but everybody's, the world,
Yeah.
right?
What's your sun sign, Rob?
Aries.
Oh, okay, Aries. So my dad's in Aries. Always like to joke, "Oh, the child of the zodiac," because my dad's always, "I'm number one, the first sign of the zodiac," and I've got a lot of astrology humor. But those are action people. Those are the people that get stuff done. So.
Wow, that is cool and interesting. You would say that. Well, in an indirect way, I guess you're giving me a compliment. So I perceive it as a compliment. But it's funny because the last podcast that I did was an interview with a friend of mine from high school, Brian Siskin, who does Art Fight podcast, and he was talking about relating to me and himself being somebody who gets things done, and me being that kind of person, because when I was younger, we organized music, gigs all the time and venues, and just being a doer, and
yeah, you're an Aries total doer. That's your whole concept of action. And to me, it's like a child at heart. They really are fun. They bring that fire. Definitely easy to get burned by fire, but you're more likely to get burned by the fire from a Leo than say an Aries. But Aries get stuff started.
Very cool.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much, and everybody like the video and subscribe, or you can find us if you prefer the audio on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, you two, and we'll have to do it again.
Thank you for having me, Rob. Really appreciate it. And great meeting you, Lisa.